The presence of the British Empire in Egypt. Welcome. Today, we'll dive into a topic that holds immense significance in the history of colonialism and global politics. The presence of the British Empire in Egypt. This period, spanning nearly three-quarters of a century, profoundly shaped Egypt's politics, economy, and culture. But how did Britain, located thousands of miles away, manage to establish such control over Egypt? And what were the consequences for its people and state? Let's explore. Context. Egypt, before British intervention. By the early 19th century, Egypt was formally part of the Ottoman Empire, though it operated with considerable autonomy. In the year 1805, Muhammad Ali rose to power, ushering in an era of significant reforms. He sought to modernize Egypt, introducing contemporary technologies in agriculture, the military, and industry, strengthening Egypt's position as a promising regional power. However, modernization required substantial financial resources. To secure funding, Egypt entered into close partnerships with European powers. One of the most ambitious projects of the time was the construction of the Suez Canal, which began in the mid-19th century under French direction. While the canal was an economic marvel, it also became a financial burden for Egypt. By the late 1870s, it had accumulated massive foreign debt, leaving the nation vulnerable to the pressures of its creditors. In the late 1870s, Britain and France assumed control of Egypt's finances to ensure debt repayment. This external control ignited public discontent, eroding national pride and worsening the lives of ordinary Egyptians. British occupation of Egypt. The crisis peaked in the early 1880s when a nationalist uprising, led by Ahmed Urabi Pasha, erupted. The revolt stemmed from public outrage over economic dependence, political subjugation, and the increasing European presence. The nationalists demanded reforms and the removal of foreign advisors. For Britain, the Suez Canal was strategically vital as the primary route to India and other Asian colonies. Losing control of Egypt posed a significant threat to its imperial interests. In the early 1880s, British troops landed in Alexandria under the pretext of protecting the canal and restoring order. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Tel el-Kebir, where British forces defeated Urabi Pasha's army. This marked the beginning of British occupation. Though Egypt technically remained part of the Ottoman Empire, real power rested with British officials. Britain claimed its presence was temporary, but its influence endured well into the mid-20th century. This occupation signified the loss of Egyptian sovereignty despite continued nationalist resistance, administrative rule, and influence. After the occupation, Egypt was governed by British officials, the most prominent of whom was Lord Cromer. As consul general from the early 1880s to the early 20th century, Cromer wielded extensive authority over Egyptian administration. His policies focused on economic stability, often at the expense of the Egyptian population's welfare. Britain implemented extensive irrigation projects to boost agriculture, with cotton becoming the primary export crop. This focus on monoculture made Egypt's economy highly dependent on global cotton prices, leaving it vulnerable to market fluctuation. In terms of social policy, Britain largely neglected the education and healthcare needs of Egyptians. Higher education was deemed unnecessary for the local population, as British officials aimed to prevent the emergence of an educated elite capable of challenging colonial rule. Economic disparity deepened under British rule. The peasantry, which formed the majority of Egypt's population, remained impoverished, while wealth was concentrated in the hands of colonial administrators and a compliant local elite. Social and cultural changes. British presence influenced more than just Egypt's economy. It also left a mark on its culture. European architecture, fashion, and business practices became prominent in urban centers, though many Egyptians viewed this as a threat to their cultural identity. Archaeological discoveries, such as the uncovering of Tutankhamun's tomb in the early 20th century, garnered global attention. However, British archaeologists often exported valuable artifacts, provoking resentment among Egyptians who viewed these treasures as integral to their heritage. The rise of the independence movement. Nationalist sentiments began to grow in the early 20th century as Egyptians observed their country being exploited for foreign interests. The First World War exacerbated this tension as Britain declared Egypt protectorate and utilized its resources for the war effort. After the war, inspired by global calls for self-determination, Egyptians intensified their struggle for independence. The revolution of 1919, led by Saad Zaghloul and the Wafd Party, brought protests, strikes, and civil disobedience across the nation. This period marked a turning point. Britain realized it could not maintain control without significant concessions. In the early 1920s, Egypt was granted formal independence, though Britain retained control over key areas, including the Suez Canal and foreign policy. The end of British presence. Ending British control in Egypt was a protracted process, intertwined with rising nationalist fervor, global political shifts, and the leadership of figures like Gamal Abdel Nasser. During the Second World War, Britain increased its military presence in Egypt, citing the need to protect the Suez Canal. However, Egyptians viewed this as further occupation, fueling anti-British sentiments. Post-war decolonization movements and the emergence of the United States and the Soviet Union as superpowers created a new international dynamic. In the early 1950s, the Free Officers Movement, led by Nasser, staged a coup that overthrew King Farouk and ended Egypt's monarchy. This revolution laid the groundwork for full Egyptian sovereignty. The most defining moment came in the mid-1950s when Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. This act provoked a military response from Britain, France, and Israel, but international pressure, particularly from the U.S. and USSR, forced them to retreat. This victory solidified Egypt's independence and established Nasser as a leader of anti-colonial movements. By the mid-1950s, British troops had fully withdrawn from Egypt, marking the end of an era of colonial domination, legacy of British rule. Today, the legacy of British rule in Egypt is complex. On one hand, it brought infrastructure developments, such as railways and irrigation systems, and contributed to archaeological discoveries. On the other hand, colonialism caused economic exploitation, cultural losses, and deep social inequality. The lessons of this period remain relevant, reminding us of the importance of national sovereignty and the dangers of economic dependence. Conclusion. The history of Britain's presence in Egypt is a multifaceted narrative of power, resistance, and transformation. It illustrates how imperial ambitions can intersect with the lives of millions, leaving a lasting impact. If you enjoyed this exploration, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. History teaches us to view the present through the lens of the past. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next episode.